Hi, I'm Dave of Urban Astro, and today we're going to cover the Flat Wizard. Now, you can use the Flat Wizard basically in two different ways. One way is if you don't have an automated flat panel, but just have a flat panel that you manually place onto your scope. When you're done with your imaging session, you can come here to the Flat Wizard and you can actually set it up to do flats for you, and it will run through and capture those flats for you based upon your flat panel. And I used to run it that way when I did not have an automated flat panel like my Deep Sky Dad. I used the Pegasus Astro Flatmaster. I think it's the 150 size is what I was using. And I would set that up so that I could run and do my flats. Now, some folks like sky flats, and so they prefer to do sky flats. And the Flat Wizard here allows you to do any mix and match that you want. So the first things that you need to do is you need to make sure that your camera is on, and you can see that I'm at -10. For my temperature, -10.3. That's typically where I run my camera at, is -10. And when I do my flats, I like to run it at -10 as well. I don't probably really need to. I don't see any changes in the times, but I just do that because, again, that's part of my imaging night. Is I'm going to do imaging, and then basically how I'm going to use the Flatmaster is I'm going to basically train the flat panel and Nina on how long to take my flats for each filter. And then I can incorporate that into my advanced sequencer. And so that's basically how I use it. But you need to have your camera, and it needs to be on so that you can take pictures. You can take your flats and dark flats if you so wish. If you have a filter wheel, you need to have your filter wheel turned on and set up. I have the ZWO EFW 7-position 2-inch filter wheel, and I've got LRGB and hydrogen alpha and oxygen 3 and sulfur 2, which I just abbreviate to HOS. And then you need your flat panel, and in my case I have an automated flat panel. I use the Deep Sky Dad flat panel system, and it works really, really great, and I have no problems with it, and that's what I use. Now, when you come here to the Flat Wizard itself, you notice that it's the fourth item over here on the main menu section, if you will, is the Flat Wizard. And you'll notice several different things here. You'll notice that when you first open it up, it's going to show like a single mode. And that's assuming that you're running something like an OSC, a one-shot color camera, where you have a single filter, probably, I don't know, an Optolong L Pro or L Extreme or some other kind of a filter that you're running. And you just need to take flats and dark flats. Then you just go into single mode, and you set up your parameters that you would like to run through, and we'll cover these here in just a minute. And then you just go ahead and you run your flats. So the first thing is target name. Now, if you're doing a manual panel and you're not automating, you're not training Nina on how long to do each filter and at what light setting to turn your panel on to. If you're not going to automate Nina, then in this case you can put in the object name. You know, it could be like, I don't know, M4, Messier 4, which is in the row Ophiuchi. It's a cluster that's in the row Ophiuchi cloud complex. So you could put in a target name there, and then it will name all these flats and dark flats, and it will include M4 in the naming convention. So that's what that's for. If you use this for training, which is really what I'm going to show you, it doesn't matter what target name you put in there because it's not going to use it. It's going to use whatever target name is set up in the advanced sequence. But this is if you're going to do it manually. And then you can tell it how many flats you want to take and how many dark flats you want. And I don't think that there's a limit. I think you can put 100 in here if you want. I don't know why you would do 100, but you can. I typically will do something like 35 and 35, and I just do 35. It's something I've been doing now for years. I don't know if I really have a good reason to. I could probably do less than 35. I could probably get away with maybe doing 10. It just kind of depends. And then you get the choice here. Again, I don't have the mount plugged in, and so if I had the mount plugged in, I'd be able to slew to zenith or wherever my mount is facing, whether it's to the east or to the west. And this becomes important if you're going to do sky flats. And to do that, we come down here to wizard mode, and there'll be three options. There'll be dynamic exposure, and you notice that it changes down here. So because it's dynamic exposure, it's going to set the flat panel brightness at a static value, and then it's going to change the exposure values so that the histogram is where it needs to be based on the last two parameters, the histogram mean target and the mean tolerance, which we'll get to in just a minute. So you notice that these change. So when we come here to dynamic brightness, they change. Now exposure time becomes static. You put in how long of an exposure you want, and then it will figure out what the brightness of the flat panel needs to be in order to reach your histogram mean target of 50%, plus or minus 10%, or whatever the tolerance value you put in there. So that's what dynamic brightness and dynamic exposure does. And then if you go to sky flats, well, you don't have a dynamic exposure or brightness. You just have the sky, and you probably put, like I see a lot of guys will put like a white t-shirt over and point it to the astronomical dawn or the twilight sky. And you can sit here and you can play with your exposure values, and you can say, okay, anywhere from 0.2 seconds up to 20 seconds or maybe 30 seconds. It just kind of depends on what the sky conditions are when you actually take your sky flats, and you can then just run this thing and it will find which exposure setting will get you to that histogram being at the 50% plus or minus 10%. So those are your three wizard modes. Those are your three wizard modes that you get. So the other part of this is the single mode is if, like I said, if you're running a one-shot color camera and you've got a single filter, then this is definitely the way to go. You know, you got an L Optilong, L Extreme, or L Pro, or any other kind of filter, and you have it in your camera or in your image train somewhere, then you can run the single one here. The multi-mode is if you have a filter wheel, like I've got a filter wheel, and you can set these values up based upon what wizard mode for each filter that you have in your filter wheel. So that's basically kind of what this wizard here allows you to do. And what ends up happening is when you actually run this thing, it will go through, it will take the picture, it will display the picture right here. It will display the picture and it will show you a histogram. As you can see here, I was running this just a little bit earlier, and here's my histogram right here. It's a little off. Again, my median target is 32,768, which is half of 65,435 or something crazy like that. I forget exactly what it is. And I put a mean tolerance of 5% because I like it to be as close to the histogram as possible. I don't want it to have too much breathing room. I want it to be kind of close. And so I do a 5%, which allows it to be like up to 52.5 or 47.5 on the low side. And that pretty much will guarantee that my histogram will be right here dead smack in the center. And that's really kind of what's on the bottom here, is you've got your histogram levels right here, and you've got the median is right there. That's the 32,768. That's this guy right here. And here's the histogram itself from the last shot that I took. And you see that I'm not quite there. In fact, my ADUs was only 29,486. So I wasn't within my tolerance levels that I had set up. So I can go anywhere from 31,130 up to 34,406. So it will adjust the brightness and retake it until this guy right here, the histogram, is kind of in that middle. And that's really kind of the whole goal. Now, that's if you're doing manual. Now, if you have an automated flat system like what I've got, I use the Flat Wizard once for training purposes. I basically train Nina on the values to use when I incorporate taking flats and dark flats within my advanced sequencer. And when we get to the advanced sequencer, I'll show you all that. So in a sense, this is like the first part of the building blocks. And we'll use this building block in the advanced sequencer, which I'll show you later on. But we got to build that building block first. So if we come up here to the equipment, and you notice here I'm in the flat panel hardware, you notice that over here we got a section here called Flat Wizard Trained Exposure Times. And we got the filter and the binning and the gain and the offset, and then the brightness of the flat panel and the exposure time. And you can use the Flat Wizard to basically train Nina to capture all those metrics so that when you go to the advanced sequencer and you add in a container for flats and for dark flats, it uses this information to help you automate that process. So when I'm out at a night of imaging, when I'm done imaging, it automatically goes and takes my flats for me because I've got a deep SkyDad flat panel. It closes and it turns on and it takes my flats, and then it turns off and it takes my dark flats. And it's all automated. It's all part of the advanced sequencer. And when I get to my data, I've got my light frames, my flat frames, and my dark flat frames. And it's really kind of clean and really kind of nice. And so that's pretty much what I'm going to show you here, is how to go in and set this thing up so that you can train Nina on how to take your flats. We'll go in here to the flat panel. Again, because I'm training, the target name is immaterial. It doesn't matter. And to be honest with you, I only need, I'm not doing sky flats, so let's change this. I'm going to change this to 0 because darks, it just takes whatever the flat time is and just does flats based off of that time, so I don't need to do flats. And I usually just do one flat for training. I find that taking multiple flats doesn't really change anything, and so it's kind of a waste of time to go through and do that. But you can do more if you want, but you'll find that it doesn't really change anything. So one and done will get you there. Now, how I set up my parameters here, because I have a filter wheel, I go to multi-mode, which is what I've got right here. Now I have a choice to make. I can either do dynamic exposure, meaning that I set my flat panel brightness as a static value, and then Nina will figure out what exposure value to use based off of that flat panel brightness. Or I can change this to dynamic brightness. And what dynamic brightness does now is you set your exposure time as a static value, meaning the exposure will always be 2 seconds long, but it will figure out what panel brightness to get to that 50 percentile or get to within 5% of that 50 percentile, as you see that I've got it configured there. And the other thing that I do is my flat panel can go all the way up to 4096 for max flat panel brightness. I don't need to. These are LRGB. They let in a lot of light. So you don't need to start off with a value of 4096, because how the flat panel training processor works is it will expose at 4096. You'll get a white screen, and then it will take half of that, and you'll get a white screen, and then it takes half of that, and you get a white screen, and you'll keep going and going and going and going and going until you get down to around 30 for your L. L will come in somewhere in the neighborhood of like 28. So I could start out at 4096 if I had a lot of time, but I know that at least for LRGB, I'm not going to get, the lightness, the brightness of the panel isn't going to be that high for those. So I could actually start this at like 100. In fact, that's probably what I'll do, is I'll probably start that at 100. These guys I'll start at 200. This is R and G, because they are not quite letting quite the same amount of light as L does. And then for my H, I'm going to start this at about 2000. And my O is going to be about 2000. And my S is going to be about 2000. And again, you just kind of figure the stuff out. If you're not really sure about your flat panel brightness and what the brightness values are going to be, you can go in and test and just run one of these. You just turn it on, and then you can run it and see what values you get, and then use that to kind of judge what the other values are going to be. Or you can just start with a full brightness and just let it take its time, but it just takes a long time. So the other thing that I set, as you notice here, is I have my LRGB set to 2 seconds for exposure, and I have my narrowband set at 5. That's just personal preference. You can set it for anything that you want. It depends upon your camera. I know that some cameras, I believe it's like the 294, you get banding or you get strange artifacts if you don't take at least 2 to 3 seconds. If you try to do shorter exposures than that, you get less than good results. So it really kind of depends upon your camera. I just find that 5 seconds for my narrowband works just fine, and 2 seconds for my broadband stuff works just fine. The other thing that I will change is I'll change my mean tolerance. It defaults at 10. I set it to 5 because I want it to be closer to the mean than further away from the mean. The closer to the mean, I think the better results you end up getting when you use your flats and calibrate your light frames. So there we go. So everything's pretty much all set up. I'm going to turn everything on. And I'll speed through this part of the video, but this is going to take a little while. This is going to take about 10 minutes to run through and do all this, and we'll see if we have any issues. I'll walk you here through the first one. You notice here that the histogram is over here, and we're retaking it, and we're pretty close. We're at 3070. Yeah. Oh, we're. Why is it? Okay, it's getting it close. Thought we were right on it. Okay, we're at 34. What are we set at? Okay, so now we're going to do R. So you see here, right here is where the frame shows up, and you see where the histogram here is right here, and that's kind of what this does. Is this trains, and as it runs through, it will train and figure out what the, in my case, what the panel brightness needs to be based upon the exposure time that I've set. Okay, we've taken our flats and we've trained them. Now you notice that I had to go in and I had to make some adjustments because we had some failures, and so what I did was I just went ahead and stopped the process. If you go in here in the Flat Wizard, there's an X over here when you're actually running, and you can just hit that X and it will stop that particular process, and then you can go in and you can tweak your settings. And I had to tweak my settings on a couple of these. I forgot on my G that I hadn't set my exposure to 2 seconds, and I had it set for 30 seconds. So, no, it was my red. Sorry, my red had failed because I had set it for 30 seconds, and it just, yeah, it was just too much. So I went ahead and I stopped it, and I changed it and retweaked it. What you can do is, as you go through these, you can turn them off after you're done. And you notice here that I had to go back into my sulfur again, and I had to tweak it. I had to bring it up to 4096 because I had gone in after I adjusted the R, G, and B to 500 from the 200. I figured that I probably should readjust my H, O, and S up to 3000, and I did that. And then when we got to S, it basically went up to like 2,999, and I still wasn't reaching where the median was. So I stopped it and I changed it to 4096, which is the max brightness, and thankfully I was able to get that to work. I can turn that off now, and If we go up here to equipment and to the flat panel, you can see what the results here are. You can see that the brightness for luminance is 28 and it's 250 for the red. That's why it failed, because it couldn't get there, and I had it set at 200 if you remember. For some reason, red, surprising to me. Panel brightness is 250 for that, and then it's 86 for green and 78 for blue, and all those are at 2 seconds. And then at 5 seconds we have hydrogen alpha at 2250 for panel brightness, and oxygen, amazingly, is only 938 for 5 seconds. And you see sulfur here is all the way up to 3584. And I had to bump that up in my configuration to 4096 to make sure that I could get a 5-second exposure. So now that it's trained on this, these are the values that it's going to use for brightness. And again, if you have a panel like the Pegasus Astro Flatmaster, you can also train it as well. And then when you go in to actually use the Flat Wizard, it will use some of these timings, I believe, to go ahead and help you take your flats when you go to take your flats manually. So anyways, hopefully this was somewhat helpful and at least got you kind of to see how this Flat Wizard works. And we'll use all this stuff. Again, this is like a building block, and that's what I find in Nina is you do this and you do that, and they're all building blocks that when you get to the advanced sequencer, you're able to then use those building blocks and structure it in such a way that you're able to automate your system and automate the data acquisition process as much as you want. I know this has been a really long video, and I apologize for that. It's just that there's no way to get through the flat panel wizard without taking this time. So until next time, clear skies and happy guiding.